Cheech! Alright guys, let's have a discussion about gun control. Because there's been a lot of different conversations going around, and I feel like the voice of reason is kind of absent from most of them. Every 2 weeks it seems we have one of these mass shootings or horrible tragedies, and it's terrible. It sucks that this keeps happening. Every time it happens, the same arguments just keep popping up. You have the Republican side, which is, don't ban guns, we need to have as many guns, combat the situation with more guns. And then you have the Democrats, who want to ban guns, make it harder to get guns, or at the very least, have more regulations behind who gets guns. So let's start with the Democrat side. They are not trusting of the Republican Party at all. The GOP is their mortal enemy in their eyes and are just out there to expand this racist patriarchy, right? Well, why would you want to give them all of the weapons? You want to hand all of the power of defending yourself over to people that you don't trust to make laws. So why would you trust them with your lives? Why would you trust them to have all the guns and not just inflict martial law and just fucking roll over people? If the state is becoming more and more authoritarian, why would you give them all the power? Why would you give them all the weapons if they're already overstepping their bounds and restricting freedoms and just doing whatever they can to keep people in line?
So, oftentimes the counter-argument to this will be, the government has all of this advanced military technology. What could we ever hope to accomplish with just our measly weapons? They have tanks and drones and bombs and missiles and all this fancy stuff. What could our rifles and pistols do?
To this I say, you merely need to look at the past 60 years of modern warfare. There's been many cases where people armed with nothing more than AK-47s and Toyota pickup trucks were able to resist and even win against giant armies with tanks and planes and bombs. It's not unfeasible. It's an entirely possible thing to do. Look at places like Vietnam. Look at places like Cuba. Look at many regions in the Middle East where there's ongoing conflicts with people who are not very well armed at all, who are managing to give quite the difficult time to these just massive armies. Even the United States, the most heavily funded army on the planet, is lost against Vietnam. And they were not very well armed at all. They didn't have an air force or anything like that. So disarming a population can remove the potential for it to resist an authoritative regime and removes the possibility of the people fighting back if it comes to that. So continuing to look at the Democratic side of the conversation, oftentimes when you hear people arguing for the limit or banning of guns, they're under the impression that it'll affect all demographics of gun owners equally. It'll affect gun owners, and it won't be a travesty on anybody individually or any group specifically. But that's not the case. When you look at current gun banning in this country, it has overwhelmingly been to limit the access of guns to the poor and to minorities. People who are probably the most in need of weapons to defend themselves are oftentimes the only ones affected by gun bans. If you look at the biggest example of banning guns in this country, and during the Reagan administration, the only significant gun ban that has ever passed in this country, you could look at the assault rifle weapons ban that Clinton passed, but George Bush let sunset. That's not in effect anymore. I don't consider that significant because it's gone. Meanwhile, this one is still active. So the problem with this one is, well, it only affects the poor, because if you can afford it, you can, without a doubt, go get a license and still buy an automatic weapon as long as you can afford it, because it's expensive. They just made it more expensive. Not, really limited, just expensive. Civilians can't buy any weapons made after 1980 something, but there's a whole bunch of guns made before then and they still work. You can still find tons of weapons made prior to this law that aren't doctored in, and you can just, as long as you're rich enough, you can buy them. If you also look at the
the actual timeline of this bill passing, you can see its racist implications pretty much. It was basically passed just for racism. Like, it wasn't any danger to people. There wasn't a lot of stuff going on. Disproportionate amount of stuff going on, sorry. It wasn't like there was more mass shootings then than there are now. There are way more now. But when you look at why they banned automatic weapons, well, it was in direct response to the Black Panther Party policing their own streets, trying to prevent police brutality. They would walk around with automatic weapons, and if police were in the neighborhood, they wouldn't beat the hell out of an unarmed black person because there's a bunch of black people down the street with automatic weapons. Now, to my knowledge, there wasn't any confrontations between the two. There was never any, gun battles on the streets of LA where the Black Panthers were shooting up cops. That is not the case at all. The Black Panther Party has been painted in a horrible light as of late, when more often than not they were running, food donation programs at community gardens and education programs. At one time in poor neighborhoods, their education program was actually better than public schooling in California, which is amazing. Their community activism was, to be applauded. Republicans saw a bunch of black people with automatic weapons walking around the street, and they banned automatic weapons. The only significant gun ban in this country was passed by Ronald Reagan and the Republicans in response to black people standing up for themselves against police, essentially. That's, when you boil it down, that's what you're left with. Now, the last argument it's the lightest one on the Democrat side, is to not ban guns, but just to limit people's access to guns. And they often frame this as, mentally ill people are the ones committing all these crazy mass shootings and whatnot. Let's just ban mentally ill people from gaining guns. First of all, what's the legal definition of mental illness right now? Right? We don't have one. It's not written in stone. It's not something that you could legally define. So if it's not legally defined before any sort of gun limitation or gun ban bill is passed, they could define it however they want. If you went into the doctor saying that you were depressed and whatnot, let's just ban mentally ill people from gaining guns. First of all, what's the legal definition of mental illness right now? Right? We don't have one. It's not written in stone. It's not something that you could legally define. So if it's not legally defined before any sort of gun limitation or gun ban bill is passed, they could define it however they want. If you went into the doctor saying that you were depressed, if you've ever been on Xanax or Ritalin or any number of things, they could just ban your use of guns. They could even go further. There's talk right now of putting everybody who's on the no-fly list on the gun ban list, which, I don't know if you know this, but the no-fly list is not, there's no due process for getting put on the no-fly list. It's all bureaucratic. So you could have a suspicious name. You could have a similar name to somebody who actually committed a crime. Somebody couldn't like you in the upper tiers of the government, and they could just put you on the list. And then your rights to own a gun are gone, with no due process at all. Because, it's one thing when they ban violent felons from owning a weapon, but it's another thing to just, hey, anybody who we define can't own a gun. It's really easy for people to manipulate that and turn it into, anybody we don't like doesn't get a gun. Now, that, manipulation aside, committed a crime. Somebody couldn't like you in the upper tiers of the government, and they could just put you on the list. And then your rights to own a gun are gone, with no due process at all. Because, it's one thing when they ban violent felons from owning a weapon, but it's another thing to just, hey, anybody who we define can't own a gun. It's really easy for people to manipulate that and turn it into, anybody we don't like doesn't get a gun. Now, that, manipulation aside, if you're trying to limit mentally ill people's access to guns, the only thing you're going to accomplish is making mentally ill people afraid to seek treatment.
because, you know, they're already afraid to do that now because they don't want anything damaging on their medical history, anything that would prevent them from getting any sort of job in the government or any sort of assistance or their children taken away or any number of things. So why would you add owning a gun to that? So let's switch over to the Republican side of the argument. You have people who want more guns everywhere, no gun-free zones, you know, protect the Second Amendment, yada, yada, yada. You guys have heard the argument. Now, while I will agree night and day that we need to keep our access to arms and the ability to defend ourselves, their intentions aren't good. As you can see with the only gun ban ever passed under the Reagan administration, because of the reason they like their right to own guns, they will shed it at the slightest hint of danger. If you look at their reasoning for why they love to own guns, it isn't anything, for the most part, specific. It's just, we like it because it's in the Constitution. You know, the Founding Fathers instilled this right in us, and we need to maintain that. All that does is preach a message of submissiveness. We get this right because the government told us we need this right. Politicians I respect gave me this right, so I'm going to use that right. And all that means is as soon as there's a politician that they respect, i.e. Ronald Reagan, they will shed that right as much as they need to appease that political figurehead that they adore so much. That can cause for such future problems that it's not really a good mindset to have. That's why you have the Republican Party, who wants the right things for the wrong reasons, and you have the Democratic Party, who wants the wrong things for the right reasons. And when you look at why these two corporate parties are so torn and so vocal every time there's something happening, you merely need to look at the real reasons why these school shootings are happening. You have poverty, you have the lack of spending on mental health treatment, and you have the lack of spending on education. You have education, mental health treatment, and crumbling, and poverty just on the up and up. These things directly correlate to mass shootings, crime, all this stuff. Anything else they try to correlate only correlates loosely, and even then, there's a whole bunch of holes in it. This is sound because when people get poor, when people don't have good education, and when people have untreated mental health problems, that's just a recipe for disaster. When you understand that those are the reasons behind these shootings, behind these tragedies, then you'll see why both parties don't really want to get anything done. They just want to sit there and yell at each other and try to come with some, you know, symbolic law that they'll say fixes everything, but it doesn't actually fix everything. It's because they don't want to combat these problems. It's because they don't care if people are getting more poor. They don't care if people need mental health treatment and they're not able to get it. And they don't care if people are becoming uneducated. All they care about is the bottom dollar and their donors. Alright guys, well, that's my analysis on the gun control debate in the United States. Now, if you like this video, leave a like. If you want to see more videos like it, hit the subscribe button. Leave a comment below letting me know, you know, how you felt about the video, whether you liked it, whether you disliked it. I'm just looking for some criticisms now, and I'm just starting out, kind of new to this whole thing, but, you know, I'll make some strides. Well, thanks guys. As always, I'm Cheech Guevara. Have a good one.